If it looks like we're going to actually end war, they will kill some of us. And for that cause, I volunteer to die. They will use that force to scare the rest of us into being silent. And when we look at past movements, they are not philosophically simple, they're complex. When we look at ANC in South Africa, they started out with a violent movement. They shifted their tactics to nonviolent, but they never made any statement about it. They never made a philosophical change. But if you look at their tactics changed to nonviolence, and they won. The same thing was true of the overthrow of Jorge Beco in Guatemala. And different groups in the same movement have different tactics. I always think of the 1905 Russian Revolution, when the revolution was won. It was all but done. 2/3 of the army was ready to mutiny. And at that moment, one of the working committees started firing on the army. The army, in self-defense, closed ranks. When they closed ranks, by definition, they closed around the Tsar, and that was the end of the revolution until 1917. So the question comes up. It's great talking about history, but what about now? Are we accomplishing anything? I think any fair analysis has to say we have been effective. That does not mean we're done. But we can acknowledge we are having effect. It's worth remembering also that in almost every successful nonviolent campaign, the people in the campaign at the time thought they were being ineffective. So let's look at what now. Look at Iran. The original plan was to invade Iran and Iraq at the same time. But the demonstrations before the invasion caused a slowdown, a shrinking back of the mission, and a cautious use of forces. So they couldn't do Iran then. Since that time, they mounted a full court effort to justify an invasion of Iran. I do not know of a better example of an effort to start a war being stonewalled and blocked than this one. There's been a steady stream of propaganda portraying Iran as being demonic, unfair to women, a threat to us, about to build a nuclear bomb, and violating UN resolutions. Kind of like us in Israel. There have been repeated efforts in violation of international law to provoke an excuse to attack on the model of Pearl Harbor. There was the Gulf of Hormuz incident. Right when the administration whipped up the anti-Iran fervor, there's that incident. I don't remember. It was a few years ago. There were some Iranian speedboats chasing or circling around our boats, and they were dropping white things in the water. And there was that mysterious radio transmission that the U.S. warships are about to blow up. That was an attempt to create a new Gulf of Tonkin. And in fact, in many ways, it's a better one. There was more substance to it because there were Iranian boats, there were things in there, and there was a radio transmission. And it was timed much better because the anti-Iran emotion in the nation was much higher than the anti-Vietnam War emotion, the anti-Vietnam emotion during the Gulf of Tonkin. But there was one difference, one big difference. Because of the important work of the peace movement, the American people were just not willing to buy the lie. There are some in our government who still want to invade Iran. But it is a significant victory that 6 or 7 years later, we still haven't invaded Iran. And that's because of the work of you people, and now people like you. And remember when the Bush administration talked openly about perpetual war? And do you remember when 90% of the public supported the invasion of Iraq? Now, we still occupy 2 countries, but the public discourse is not about perpetual war. It is about when are we getting out of Iraq and when are we getting out of Afghanistan? This is a big change. And it did not happen because the over-rich decided they had too much money. It happened because of all the work of you folks. The election of Obama is big. Remember when Bush had 90% approval rating? Remember when the Republicans were talking about a permanent 3 branches of the government majority? Remember when we had 2 coups in a row? The simple election of a president without a coup in this country is quite an accomplishment. Some may say that the Bush administration did themselves in, but it's just not a realistic picture. we know they would have hid anything they could hide. It was a peace movement that got bits of the truth out, despite the complicity of the media. The election of Obama was an amazing event. But it is a mistake to think that it heralds the coming of a new time. It is a mile marker that marks our ability to throw the neocons out. It does not predict the future, and it does not change our work. This reminds me of Frederick Douglass when he summed up the entire political process in one sentence, when he said, "Find out what a people will put up with in silence, and you will have found the exact measure of wrong and injustice which will be imposed upon them." Abraham Lincoln summed up the American dream during Gettysburg Address as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. That rolls off our tongues today like a meaningless cliche. We never really consider what it means. But at the time, it was truly radical to think that a people could govern themselves without an elite aristocracy to maintain civil order, to protect them, to reward the good and punish the bad. And the ideology of that American dream spread hope around the country, the world, like electricity. That's what inspired France to give us a Statue of Liberty, to show what the American dream meant around the world. Whether it was real on the ground or not is different, but what it meant around the world. That majestic giant standing there with her foot on the broken chain of oppression, cradling the Declaration, cradling the Declaration and holding that torch on high, which is a beacon of hope around the world. That is our heritage, and that is based on people taking responsibility for the government. But even when this country was brought forth, our founding fathers knew how hard it would be to maintain the public active participation to protect that republic. When Ben Franklin was asked what the Constitutional Congress had created, what the Constitution was going to give us, he said, "A republic, if you can keep it." Jefferson knew the forces that led people to abdicate their citizen responsibility and let other people hijack their government for their own end. He said, "I hold that a little rebellion now and then is as necessary to the political world as storms are to the physical world, because it refreshes people's tangible connection to their government." So back to that of the people, by the people, for the people. The operative word in that statement is by the people. If we, the people, don't take responsibility for our government, somebody else will, and I assure you they will do it for their own good. So, talking about change now. How many of you stand on vigil lines? I knew there wasn't nobody. I like vigil lines. I think that they're a great measure of what people think, what the common person's thinking. I join vigils from coast to coast, from border to border, big towns, little towns. Whenever I join a vigil now, I hear about how the response has gone from a half a peace sign to honks of support. When I was flying here, I noticed two new things. The peace symbol has come back in fashion. People are wearing it on their pants and their shirt. And in fact, in the airport terminals, it's beginning to replace camo. And another thing that I noticed is that all the people, whenever I travel on public transit, I wear a Respert Bush T-shirt. All the people who complimented me in that T-shirt, when I said, you know, it's not about Bush, it's about the Constitution. This is the first time they all said, yeah, I know. And that's really exciting. So, the power to create a better world is in our hands. The only question is, what am I going to do about it? And let me close with Margaret Mead's famous quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Thanks.